I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. My name is Jack, and I'm just an average guy in my late 30s, living a seemingly normal life with my wife, Rebecca. We've been married for about 10 years, and for the most part I thought we had a solid relationship. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who does? We've gone through the usual life stuff, moving into our first house, dealing with work stress, and even the occasional argument about whose turn it is to take out the trash. A couple of months ago, Rebecca started attending yoga classes at a local studio. I thought it was fantastic that she wanted to do something for herself, and I encouraged her to go as often as she liked. It was a great way for her to unwind, especially after a long week of work. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was off. You know how it is when your gut tells you something isn't right. At first, it was minor changes in her behavior. She became more secretive about her phone, always keeping it face down and getting defensive if I asked to see something. She was also spending longer hours at the yoga studio, which I initially thought was just her dedication to the practice. But soon, it became apparent that these yoga sessions were a convenient cover for something deeper. I noticed that she was coming home later than usual, often claiming she'd gone out for drinks with friends after class. But when I would ask about these friends, she would offer vague answers that never quite added up. One evening, I casually flipped through her Instagram while she was in the shower. I don't usually snoop through her stuff, but I was feeling suspicious. As I scrolled, I stumbled upon a photo of her and the yoga instructor, a guy named Ryan. He was in the background, arms around a couple of women, laughing and smiling. The caption was nothing special, just your typical yoga life post, but there was something about the way she was leaning into him that made my stomach drop. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their relationship than she was letting on. The next day, while running some errands, I went to the cafe near the yoga studio to grab a coffee. As I waited in line, I spotted Rebecca and Ryan sitting at a table, seemingly having a good time. They were deep in conversation and she was laughing at something he said. I felt my heart race and knots forming in my stomach as I watched them. It was a casual setting, but the way she looked at him, like he was the only person in the world, sent a chill down my spine. After a few minutes of watching their interaction, I made my way back home, my mind racing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. My gut was right. There was something going on, something that felt far worse than I'd ever imagined. The next day, I confronted Rebecca. She came home from yoga, still wearing her workout gear, glowing and relaxed. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I brought up the topic. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I felt like I was about to explode. "What's this about?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I took a deep breath. "I saw you with Ryan yesterday at the cafe. What's going on between you two?" Her eyes widened for a moment and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "Oh, come on, Jack, it's just yoga, we're friends. He's a great instructor and we joke around, you know how it is." I wasn't buying it. I pressed further, demanding the truth. Her responses became increasingly defensive, filled with excuses that only made me feel more suspicious. "You're just being paranoid. You know how much I love yoga and Ryan is just a part of that." But I could see through her walls. The laughter, the connection, it was all too familiar. The confrontation left me feeling raw, betrayed, and infuriated. I wanted to shake her and make her see how much she was hurting me, but instead I felt helpless and lost. Her words rang hollow and I knew I had to take action. I couldn't just let this slide. As the days passed, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger was at the forefront, but beneath it lay a deep sadness, a feeling of betrayal that I had never anticipated from someone I loved so deeply. And so, I began to plan my revenge. It wasn't just about making her pay for the betrayal. It was about regaining control over my life and finding a way to make her feel the discomfort she had caused me. I started to think about how I could make this yoga instructor pay for the pain he had brought into my life. In the days following my confrontation with Rebecca, I was in a whirlwind of emotions. Each day felt like an uphill battle. I oscillated between anger, hurt, and a strange clarity. It was as if I'd been awakened from a deep sleep and suddenly saw everything for what it really was. I had to do something. not just to make her feel the weight of her betrayal, but to regain my sense of self. I began to dig deeper into Rebecca's new yoga routine and her relationship with Ryan. I spent hours online, researching the studio, reading reviews, and trying to understand the dynamics there. I discovered that Ryan wasn't just an instructor. He was also the studio's co-owner, which made him a crucial part of their operations. It was a small, close-knit community that thrived on the connections between clients and instructors. This struck me as an opportunity. If I played my cards right, I could disrupt their little paradise. I started by attending classes at the studio myself. I signed up under an alias, sporting a hoodie and sunglasses to keep a low profile. I wanted to see what was happening firsthand. Watching Rebecca in her element, I noticed how she seemed to come alive in the studio. She flowed through the poses with grace, but it was the way she interacted with Ryan that caught my attention. The glances they exchanged and the laughter, they were undeniably more than just teacher and student. It was infuriating, but it was also my opportunity. During my visits, I began chatting with some of the other students. I casually picked up on the gossip surrounding Ryan, subtly probing for any dirt. It wasn't long before I learned that he was known for more than just his teaching skills. There were whispers about his flirty demeanor, how he would often cross professional boundaries, and how some students had complained about his behavior. This information was gold to me. I formulated my plan. I decided I would gather enough evidence to present to the studio's management, something that could get Ryan banned from the studio. I wasn't just looking for revenge. I wanted to make sure he understood the consequences of his actions. I wanted to rip away the peace and solace that Rebecca had found in her yoga practice. Every time she went to that studio, she would be reminded of the chaos that followed her choices. As I continued my investigation, I began to take notes, documenting conversations and behaviors that seemed inappropriate. It was sickening, but I felt justified. I was treading on a morally gray path, but the hurt I felt was driving me forward. I wanted Rebecca to realize that her actions had consequences. I also started following Rebecca during her yoga outings. I positioned myself in strategic places, near the studio entrance, at the cafe around the corner, making it easy to observe her interactions with Ryan. Each time I saw them laughing or sharing a moment, a fire ignited in me. I knew she was still lying, I could feel it in my bones, but it wasn't just the yoga studio I was concerned about. I began to think about how this affected my life. I wanted to make sure that my existence wasn't overshadowed by her betrayal. I reached out to some close friends, those I trusted, and shared what I was going through. Surprisingly, they were incredibly supportive, each offering their perspective on how to deal with the situation. Some suggested confronting her again or even seeking couples therapy, but I was too far gone in my plan for that. As the days turned into weeks, I gathered enough evidence to confront the studio. I managed to discreetly film a few interactions between Rebecca and Ryan, where their chemistry was undeniable. It was painful to watch, but it fueled my determination. I compiled everything: the notes, the videos, the conversations. I even had testimonies from a couple of other students who had felt uncomfortable with Ryan's behavior. Finally, I decided it was time to execute my plan. I scheduled a meeting with the studio's management, claiming to be a concerned patron. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, preparing for their responses. Would they dismiss me? Would they take me seriously? I didn't know, but I was ready to lay it all out. I wanted to make sure Ryan faced the consequences of his actions, and I was prepared to fight for it. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the studio with a mix of anxiety and determination. This was it, the moment I would put my plan into action. As I stepped inside, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was about to change things, to take back control, and to ensure that Rebecca's peace was shattered just as mine had been. I approached the studio manager, a woman named Lisa, who greeted me with a warm smile. I could tell she was unaware of the storm she was about to face. I introduced myself under my alias and explained that I had some concerns regarding one of the instructors, Ryan. The smile slowly faded from her face as I began recounting my experiences, laying out the evidence in front of her. As I spoke, I felt a sense of power growing inside me. I was taking charge of my own narrative, and there was no turning back now. This was the beginning of my revenge, and I was ready to see it through. I just hoped that the fallout would teach Rebecca a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. After I laid out my case to Lisa, the studio manager, I could see her expression shift from curiosity to concern. She listened intently as I described the inappropriate interactions I had observed between Rebecca and Ryan. I presented my notes, the testimonies from other students, and even the videos I had discreetly filmed. Lisa's demeanor turned grave as she took in the gravity of the situation. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Jack," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "I had no idea this was happening. We take these matters very seriously, and I will ensure that an investigation is conducted immediately." When she promised to look into the situation, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the tipping point that would start a chain reaction, one that would unravel the tranquility of Rebecca's yoga sanctuary. I left the studio feeling a mix of empowerment and dread. I knew nothing would change overnight, but I was confident that I had put the wheels in motion. In the days that followed, I kept my distance from Rebecca, allowing the tension to build. Every time she came home after yoga, I studied her face for any signs of what might have transpired during her classes. I was both excited and anxious, waiting for the fallout from my actions. I could picture her face if she learned that Ryan was under scrutiny. Would she confront me? Would she lie through her teeth again? I was prepared for whatever came next. One evening, Rebecca came home with a different energy. She was unusually quiet as she prepared dinner. I could feel the weight in the air, thick and suffocating. I wanted to poke at it, to prod her about how things were going with Ryan, but I held off. I was biding my time, wanting to let the suspense build before dropping the bomb on her. But then, out of nowhere, she turned to me and asked, "Jack, have you noticed anything strange at the studio lately?" My heart raced. This was it, the opening I needed. "What do you mean?" I replied, trying to play it cool. "I don't know, I heard some of the students talking about Ryan and I thought it was weird. Like he's been more distant lately," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "They say there's been an investigation or something." I feigned surprise. "Really? I hadn't heard anything about it. Maybe it's just rumors." As the conversation continued, I felt a thrill at the thought that my plan was already causing ripples in her world. The uncertainty in her voice made it clear that she was worried, and I loved every moment of it. Days turned into a week, and the tension at home was palpable. Rebecca was on edge, and the excitement of her yoga classes had dulled. She often checked her phone looking for messages from the studio, and I could see the anxiety written all over her face. It was intoxicating to watch her squirm. One night as we lay in bed, I decided it was time to confront her. I turned to her and asked casually, "So, how's yoga going? You seemed a little stressed out lately." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "You wouldn't believe it, Jack. The studio is just chaotic right now. Ryan isn't even there most days. I don't know what's happening, but students are starting to question things." I couldn't help but push further. "Really? What do you think that means?" She looked at me, trying to gauge my reaction. "I don't know. I mean, people are saying he's been too flirty, and now there's this investigation. It's just not like it used to be." I held back a smirk, hiding my satisfaction. "Sounds like it might be for the best then. Maybe it's time for a new instructor." Her eyes narrowed as she studied me. "What do you mean by that? You seemed supportive of my yoga journey before." "Sure, but if it's causing you this much stress, maybe it's time to reconsider your options." I replied casually, masking my ulterior motive. That night, I went to bed feeling a rush of power. Each time I saw Rebecca's worried face, each time she brought up the gossip surrounding the studio, I felt a sense of control that I hadn't experienced in weeks. My revenge was unfolding perfectly, and I was loving every second of it. But as the investigation dragged on, I began to realize that things were about to take a sharp turn. One evening, I was scrolling through social media when I stumbled upon a post from the yoga studio's official account. It was a picture of Ryan, with a caption announcing his suspension pending the investigation. My heart raced. This was exactly what I had aimed for, but seeing it in black and white made it all too real. I knew that this was going to hit Rebecca hard. She had clung to Ryan as her favorite instructor, and now he was gone. I anticipated the fallout, imagining her reaction when she found out. The next day, I decided to drop a casual hint. "Hey, did you see the studio's post about Ryan?" I asked nonchalantly, watching her closely. Her face fell and she blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "They announced that he's suspended," I said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. "I guess there were some complaints about his behavior." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. "What? No way, what did he do?" I feigned ignorance, but inside I was a whirlwind of emotions. Her shock was palpable, and I could see the pieces of her world starting to crumble. I had expected her to lash out or deny everything, but instead she seemed genuinely shaken. "I do." "No, Rebecca, you should ask around if you're worried," I said, leaning back, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. The next few days were tense. Rebecca spiraled into an anxious state, constantly checking her phone, reaching out to friends, and trying to gather any information she could about Ryan and the studio. I could see her grappling with her emotions, torn between disbelief and anger. Each day was a new battle for her, and I was right in the thick of it, watching her unravel. As the situation escalated, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. I had wanted revenge, but this was starting to feel like more than I had bargained for. It was enough to make me question my own motives, but I quickly shoved those feelings aside. I reminded myself of Rebecca's betrayal, of the way she had played me for a fool. But as I watched her struggle, I realized I had no real plan for what came next. I couldn't just destroy her world without thinking about the aftermath. I had to consider what it would mean for us, for our marriage, and for my own well-being. I had crossed a line, and now I had to deal with the consequences of my actions. As I contemplated the next steps, I knew I had to make a decision. What did I really want? Did I want to salvage our marriage, or was I too far gone into the revenge game? Would I be able to look at her the same way again once the dust settled? The emotional weight of my choices began to settle heavily on my shoulders as I prepared for the next phase of this twisted journey. The aftermath of my actions began to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Watching Rebecca descend into a state of anxiety and confusion was both exhilarating and disconcerting. I had successfully gotten Ryan suspended, but it felt like I was playing with fire. Each day, I grappled with the moral implications of my revenge while trying to keep my emotions in check. Rebecca's behavior grew erratic. She would come home from the yoga studio, her face a mask of anxiety. She started to talk incessantly about how unfair it was that Ryan had been suspended without due process. "He was always so supportive of me, Jack. He did deserve this," she would say, her voice tinged with desperation. I felt a twinge of guilt at her distress, but I quickly buried it under layers of anger and betrayal. How could she defend him after everything? In the weeks that followed, I noticed her becoming more withdrawn, spending hours scrolling through social media, looking for updates about the investigation. She would occasionally mention the other students who were rallying behind Ryan, and it only fueled the fire of my resentment. One night as we sat in our living room, Rebecca turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. "Jack, can we talk about Ryan? I don't think he did anything wrong. I don't want to lose my yoga family over this." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "You mean your yoga family that's been sneaking around behind my back? I think you need to wake up to reality, Rebecca." I snapped, unable to contain my frustration. Her eyes widened in shock, and I could see her grappling with the hurt in my words. "What do you want from me, Jack? I thought you were supportive of my journey. This has nothing to do with you and me. I thought you understood that." I stood up, pacing the room, uncertain of how to express the tangled mess of emotions inside me. "It has everything to do with us. You've been lying to me, and you're still defending him." As I argued with her, I realized I was caught in a cycle of anger and betrayal that was dragging me down a path I wasn't sure I wanted to travel. I needed to find clarity amidst the chaos, but every time I looked at Rebecca, I was reminded of the pain she had caused. Days passed, and I watched her struggle in silence. She began attending fewer yoga classes, overwhelmed by the ongoing drama surrounding Ryan. I could see the stress etched on her face, and it started to worry me. My plan for revenge had taken a toll on her, and despite my initial satisfaction, I began to ponder the consequences of my actions. One afternoon, I returned home from work to find her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, approaching her slowly. She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Jack, I feel lost. All I wanted was to find peace through yoga, and now everything feels like it's falling apart. I can't believe Ryan's gone." I felt a pang of sympathy as I watched her break down. It was hard to see her like this, but a part of me still felt justified. I had taken action to protect myself, to fight against the betrayal, but in doing so, I had also hurt the person I loved. "Maybe this is a sign that you need to reevaluate what you want," I said cautiously. "If Ryan has been crossing boundaries, maybe it's time to find a new instructor, someone who respects your commitment to yoga." She looked at me, her expression shifting from sorrow to anger. "Don't you get it, Jack? It's not just about him. I felt like I belonged there, and now I feel alienated." I wanted to scream that she had brought this upon herself, that her choices had consequences. But instead, I pushed those feelings aside and tried to comfort her instead. "What if we find another studio? Maybe there are other places you could try." As the days turned into weeks, the tension in our home felt suffocating. I had been feeding off her distress, but now I was beginning to feel the weight of my actions. The thrill of revenge was fading, and I was left with an unsettling sense of emptiness. One evening, I came home and found her sitting at the dining table with a notebook, jotting down thoughts. "What's that?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Just ideas for a new yoga class," she replied, her voice monotone. "I thought it might help me cope. Channel my energy into something positive." I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the turning point we both needed. "That sounds like a great idea. You could focus on what you love about yoga rather than what's happened." She nodded, but I could tell she was still grappling with her emotions. "I just wish this hadn't happened. I miss the way things were before," she said softly. Her words struck me. She wasn't just mourning Ryan's absence. She was mourning the loss of her peace and the joy she had found in yoga. I couldn't help but feel a mix of guilt and sympathy. Yes, she had hurt me, but I had also hurt her in return. I had allowed revenge to cloud my judgment and ruin the good things in our relationship. That night, as I lay in bed, I contemplated my next steps. I couldn't continue down this path of destruction without questioning my intentions. My initial goal had been to make Rebecca feel the pain I had felt, but now I was confronted with the reality of our marriage. If I wanted to salvage what we had, I needed to find a way to let go of the anger and resentment. The next morning, I decided to clear the air. I sat down with Rebecca over breakfast, taking a deep breath before diving in. "Can we talk about everything that's happened? I think we need to be honest with each other." She looked up, surprised but willing. "Okay, I'm listening. I know I've been consumed by anger and I've let it cloud my judgment. But I want to move forward to find a way to heal together." I admitted, my voice steady. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "I've made mistakes, Jack. I've lied and buried my head in the sand, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." We talked for hours that morning, laying bare our feelings and fears. It was painful but cathartic. We had both been holding onto our hurt for too long. I realized that while I sought revenge, I had also pushed Rebecca away, and we needed to work together to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. As we began to navigate the rough waters of our marriage, I knew it wouldn't be easy. But in acknowledging our struggles, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were still in this together, and that realization gave me the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The game of revenge had taken its toll, but perhaps it could lead us to a new beginning, one where we could heal and learn from our mistakes. As I reflected on the journey so far, I knew that while revenge may have felt satisfying in the moment, it was empathy and understanding that would ultimately guide us toward healing. I was ready to embrace that path, even if it meant letting go of the anger that had consumed me for far too long. As the weeks went by, I focused on rebuilding the trust between Rebecca and myself. After the intense conversations we had, I felt a renewed sense of determination to work through the pain and betrayal. It was clear that we both needed to change, and our first step was to be honest about our feelings moving forward. I encouraged Rebecca to channel her energy into creating her own yoga class. It became a project that breathed new life into her, and I saw her passion slowly return. She spent late nights working on her curriculum, her excitement slowly building as she envisioned a space where students could come to find peace, much like she once had. I could see that this was her way of regaining control over her life, and I wanted to support her every step of the way. At the same time, I was working on my own emotional journey. I started attending a support group for individuals dealing with betrayal and infidelity. It was a strange experience at first, sitting in a circle with strangers sharing their stories of heartbreak. But it provided a safe space for me to sort through my feelings and realize that I wasn't alone in my struggles. One night, as I sat in the group, a woman spoke about her own experience with betrayal. Revenge might seem like the answer at first, but it only brings more pain, she said, her voice breaking. What I learned is that healing comes from forgiveness, both for yourself and for the person who hurt you. Those words resonated with me deeply. I had spent so much time focused on making Rebecca feel the same pain I had endured, but it had only led me further down a path of darkness. Perhaps it was time to consider forgiveness, not just for Rebecca, but for myself as well. I had allowed my anger to consume me, and it was time to let that go. As I worked on forgiving Rebecca, I also realized that I had to forgive myself for my own actions and the way I had handled the situation. My desire for revenge had clouded my judgment and nearly destroyed the love we had built over the years. I knew that making amends wouldn't happen overnight, but I was committed to the process. One evening, I returned home after a particularly insightful support group meeting. I found Rebecca in the living room surrounded by yoga mats and notes. She looked up at me, her face lighting up with a smile. "I think I'm ready to start my new class next week," she said, her excitement palpable. "That's amazing, Rebecca. I'm so proud of you," I replied, feeling a warmth in my chest. "You've worked so hard for this." As we talked, I noticed a change in her demeanor. The stress that had plagued her since Ryan's suspension seemed to be fading. It was as if she was reclaiming her identity, and I felt a swell of pride for her. At that moment, I knew that I wanted to support her, even if it meant putting aside my own feelings of betrayal. The day of her first class arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves as I watched her prepare. I had never seen her look so radiant and full of purpose. She wore a new outfit, and her confidence shone through as she carried her yoga mats into the studio. I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I wanted her to succeed, but I was still haunted by our past. As the class began, I watched from the back of the room, my heart swelling with pride. She moved gracefully from pose to pose, guiding her students with enthusiasm and warmth. The energy in the room was electric, and I could see how much this meant to her. The way she connected with her students was beautiful. I could tell they were drawn to her passion. After the class concluded, Rebecca approached me, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Jack, that was incredible. They loved it." I embraced her tightly, feeling a rush of love and admiration. "You were amazing, Rebecca. You found your voice again." As we talked about her experience, I felt a sense of hope blossoming within me. We were beginning to heal, and our relationship was evolving into something stronger. I realized that the journey to forgiveness was not linear, but every step we took brought us closer to understanding one another. In the weeks that followed, we began to communicate more openly, discussing our feelings and the lessons we had learned. The process was far from perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but we were both committed to moving forward together. I made a conscious effort to let go of the anger I had harbored. I focused on rebuilding our foundation and rekindling the connection we once shared. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I turned to Rebecca and said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I've realized that while I was hurt, holding on to that pain only pushed us further apart." Rebecca nodded, her eyes glistening with understanding. "I've been reflecting too. I never meant to hurt you, and I want to work on being better for both of us." In that moment, We acknowledged our past mistakes and the pain we had caused each other, but instead of letting it define us, we chose to focus on growth and healing. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But just as we were beginning to find our footing, the repercussions of my actions emerged unexpectedly. One morning, as I was reading the newspaper, I came across an article about the yoga studio and the ongoing investigation into Ryan. It detailed claims made by multiple students regarding his behavior and the studio's handling of those complaints. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I read the words. My actions had contributed to this fallout, and suddenly I was faced with the reality of what I had done. Ryan's career, his reputation, and his future were hanging in the balance. I had set out for revenge, but I hadn't thought about the extent of the damage I could cause. I had to come clean to Rebecca. So that evening, I sat her down and laid it all out. I saw an article about Ryan today and the ongoing investigation, I said, my voice trembling. It's worse than I thought. The claims against him are serious, and I realized that my actions contributed to this entire fallout. Rebecca's face fell, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. You mean you played a role in this? Jack, I thought you wanted to move on. I know, and I do, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. But I had to let you know. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but I got caught up in my anger. I didn't consider the full implications of what I did. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of disappointment and understanding. I appreciate you telling me, but this is serious, Jack. We need to think about this. And just like that, our fragile healing process was thrown into turmoil once more. I had to grapple with the reality of the consequences of my actions, and I knew that the path forward would not be easy. Would we be able to navigate the complexities of our relationship while simultaneously confronting the fallout of my revenge? As I lay in bed that night, I realized that the journey ahead required more than just forgiveness. It demanded accountability, understanding, and a commitment to rebuilding trust in a way that was honest and sincere. I couldn't change the past, but I could embrace the uncertainty of our future and hope that we would emerge stronger on the other side. In the wake of confronting the fallout from my actions, I felt a mix of dread and determination. I had opened a Pandora's box, and now it was time to face the consequences head-on. I knew that my path to redemption required more than just words. It demanded honesty, action, and a willingness to confront the mess I had created. As Rebecca and I sat down to discuss everything, I could see her processing the gravity of the situation. Jack, I appreciate your honesty, but this is serious. We need to decide how we want to handle this, she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. I know I can't change what I did, but I want to make it right, I replied, my heart racing. I never intended for it to escalate like this, and I need to take responsibility for my actions. Rebecca looked thoughtful. What do you think we should do? If it's as serious as the article suggests, we might need to consider how to approach it, both for Ryan and for us. We spent hours discussing our options, weighing the impact of my decisions against the reality of our relationship. I felt the weight of our shared history pressing down on me, but I also felt a flicker of hope. This was a turning point. How we chose to move forward could define our future together. Eventually, we decided that I needed to reach out to the studio's management and express my remorse. I realized that my motivations had stemmed from a place of hurt, but I didn't want to see anyone suffer as a result of my actions. I composed an email to Lisa, the studio manager, detailing my regrets and acknowledging the harm I had caused. I expressed my desire to rectify the situation, and I offered to have a conversation to discuss how we could move forward collectively. The next day, I received a prompt response from Lisa. She appreciated my honesty and agreed to meet. I felt a rush of anxiety mixed with relief. I was taking the first step toward making amends. As the day of the meeting approached, I felt apprehensive. I knew I had to confront the consequences of my actions, but part of me worried about how this would affect Rebecca. When I met with Lisa, I laid everything bare. I explained how my actions were driven by anger and betrayal, and I expressed my regret for the way things had unfolded. I've realized that seeking revenge only led to more pain, and I want to make this right, I said earnestly. Lisa listened attentively, her expression softening. As I spoke, "It takes a lot of courage to own your mistakes, Jack," she said. "I appreciate your honesty. We're currently reviewing all claims regarding Ryan, and I'll make sure to take your perspective into account." I left the meeting feeling a sense of relief. I had faced the damage I had caused, and I was ready to accept whatever consequences awaited me. But more importantly, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was committed to rebuilding not just my relationship with Rebecca but also my own self-worth. Back home, I shared the details of the meeting with Rebecca. She listened quietly, and as I finished recounting the conversation, I saw a flicker of pride in her eyes. "You did the right thing, Jack. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong, but it's a vital step toward healing," she said, her voice filled with warmth. In the following days, Rebecca and I continued to communicate openly. We shared our feelings and worked on our relationship, building a stronger foundation. We began attending couples therapy, where we explored our emotions and learned how to navigate our shared experiences. It was challenging, but I felt a sense of hope blossoming within me. As time passed, we both found ourselves healing in our own ways. Rebecca immersed herself in her yoga class, gaining confidence and joy as she supported her students. I focused on self-improvement, learning to manage my emotions and confront my vulnerabilities. Our bond deepened as we shared our struggles and celebrated each other's successes. One evening, while sitting on the porch together, I turned to Rebecca, my heart brimming with gratitude. "You know, this experience has changed me. I've learned so much about love, trust, and forgiveness. I never want to take what we have for granted again." She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Me too, Jack. While the journey hasn't been easy, I think we're stronger for it. I believe we can emerge from this as better partners." With each passing day, the shadows of our past began to fade. The emotional scars remained, but they served as reminders of our resilience and growth. I knew that we would still face challenges ahead, but now we had the tools to tackle them together. As I reflected on the twists and turns of our journey, I felt a sense of closure. The desire for revenge had once consumed me, but I had learned that true healing lay not in retaliation but in understanding and forgiveness. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held for us, knowing that we could face it together, hand in hand. In the end, I had discovered that love isn't just about the good times. It's about how we navigate the storms that life throws our way. I had chosen to fight for our relationship, and in doing so, I found a deeper connection with Rebecca than I had ever thought possible. We were no longer defined by betrayal. We were defined by our willingness to grow and forgive. This was our new beginning, a journey forged in love and resilience.